All right, well, first of all, thank you all for having me. I'm super excited to delve into this topic at hand. But for a bit of background, as Matt stated, I am the editor of diversity and inclusion here at Forbes. So I'm covering D&I from all aspects in society at large and also in business, looking at it from the entrepreneurial sector, looking at it in the corporate sector from top down, looking at corporate initiatives that really help to promote and leverage and foster initiatives that help marginalized communities. Prior to my current role at Forbes, I've been here for background about a year and a half. In June, it'll be a year and a half. I was formerly the leadership reporter over at CNBC, doing on-air work, as well as working on digital content. And you've probably seen some videos I've done at other outlets like Rolling Stone, where I was covering breaking news and politics, and also the New York Daily News.
Great, thank you so much, Ruth. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and to
Likewise.
be able to ask my own questions, but also facilitate questions for the group. As Matt said, I'm the president of the PR Council. I have spent my entire career, and I won't even tell this group how many years, but have spent my career in public relations agencies. It's a career opportunity I'm very passionate about, and now I have the honor of serving as president of a trade association that represents only public relations agencies, and we really work to improve the industry overall. We try to help agencies grow their talent, grow their revenue, profits, and reputations. And I think one of the most important things we do is work to diversify our industry. And it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. We're very passionate about it. We're way behind on this, but it's exciting to be a part of a conversation like this and get to know you a little bit better. So we'll jump in. As Matt said, I have some questions, but we really want to make sure we get to as many of our participants' questions as possible, so I'll be keeping an eye out for them. You shared the range of jobs you've held. Such a great career for a young person. It's really incredible. For your job at Forbes, where you're not writing every day or producing a video every day, do you have a bit more time to research and write your pieces? Can you give us a sense of what a typical day looks like for you?
Definitely. So for some background, because a lot of people ask, well, what exactly is D&I? And it seems like a very niche subject area, which it is, admittedly, but it's actually quite broad when you think about it. So what's included in D&I are topics and elements you'd expect, such as gender, looking at things from a racial perspective, but it also includes some outside perspectives, looking at mental health within the workplace, looking at employees with visible and invisible disabilities, looking at returning citizens coming back to the workplace, looking at the formerly incarcerated coming back to the workplace, looking at veterans coming back to the workplace. So it's highly nuanced and highly complex sector, and it's still in its infancy. It's still an emergent sector. So I'm excited that I'm here at Forbes getting in on the ground floor. As for my day-to-day role, it's since changed under this pandemic, but I do have much more time, and I'll relate my current work to the work I was doing previously at CNBC. So at CNBC, also another well-established legacy business media outlet, I was writing about 2 stories a day. A lot of it was breaking news. Here at Forbes, we're known more for our focus and our push on entrepreneurial capitalism, so to speak. So we're looking, especially within D&I, at systemic issues. We're writing longer form content that is far more heavily sourced than you'd see at some of our competitor brands. So there's definitely much more time to write these more engaging, more compelling stories that really get to the nitty-gritty of D&I issues. I personally have enjoyed that format. We still have our magazine, which is published bi-monthly or so. So there are a lot of opportunities for longer pieces. On our sales side, which works very heavily with our editorial side, we also have a number of conferences where we're always looking for speakers, and we're always sourcing lecturers and researchers and experts within a specific beat to speak at a number of our conferences. And so while that's more on the sales end, our editorial team also does have a direct hand in that.
Great. So talk a little bit about how your work life, you can share your personal life too, but how your work life has changed during COVID-19 and all of the implications that go along with that.
For sure. Well, for some insight, Forbes, as I said before, our motto is entrepreneurial capitalism. And so we cover that from the editorial lens, but Forbes also expects its reporters and its editors to be builders. And so prior to COVID, I was, creating editorial packages, writing long form content, pushing lists like our best employers for diversity, which is a fairly vigorous and well-vetted list. We have a social media page that we created. It's a private page, nearly 1,000 followers at this point. So working with our social team to grow that, working with our audience engagement team to write newsletters, and that one targets more so founders and executives who can really drive diversity and inclusion from the top. So while a lot has stayed the same, and I'm still pushing and promoting these various channels and these various avenues that I've established over the last year and a half, much has changed as well. And I'll focus on it from an editorial lens. Everything has to be filtered now through the COVID-19 lens, because if you don't, you can come off as looking extremely tone deaf. And so what I often will tell those who pitch me stories in particular, I'll say, okay, what's the COVID-19 angle? That is something that absolutely has to be eminent. That's something that has to be at the forefront of every pitch, especially if you're looking at underrepresented groups like women or like African Americans in the Black diaspora, because they're being hardest hit by this pandemic, both on a financial front, on an economic front, on a job loss front. So in order to make sure that we're not parent tone deaf, everything really has to be filtered through this pandemic's lens.
Awesome, thank you. So what kind of stories are you interested in right now? Can you get a little bit random?
That's a weighty question. Well, I'll say this current movement, today is what, end of May 28th. We're now going into June, and so we're looking for pitches around Pride Month. We're really looking to highlight founders, entrepreneurs, business executives who identify and are part of the LGBT plus community. In previous years, that's not a community or demographic that we've highlighted extensively at Forbes. Earlier this year, we did do a massive editorial package looking at Black History Month, for instance, and we highlighted a number of our 30 under 30 founders. We highlighted a number of executives who are part of the Black diaspora, and we really took a comprehensive, more holistic glance at how this community has shaped and sculpted and crafted business landscape in the US. So we're looking to do something similar with the LGBT community. So we're looking for, what are corporate executives doing to foster inclusion, especially because a number of Pride parades have been canceled. Pride celebrations are all now moving to the virtual space. So how are companies pivoting? How are they being creative? What's new this year? How are they marketing to this very niche audience that has been instrumental for advertisers? So right now we're gunning full speed ahead, at least on my end of the D&I end, looking at the LGBT community. So pitch me, in other words.
I think everyone heard that loud and clear. All right, we've got a question. Tony Berlin asked, what are your pet peeves when PRs are pitching you?
Ooh, how much time do we have? I'd say what comes to mind what comes to mind first, no, but in all honesty, I fostered a really strong relationship with a number of press people. I think what will automatically put your email in my junk box is if it's very clear that you don't know my coverage area. If you're pitching me something, like I cover D&I, obviously, if you're pitching me something that's completely outside of that sphere, I'm obviously not going to respond. If you're pitching me a topic that's almost identical to something that I've covered yesterday or the last week, I'm obviously not going to rewrite the exact same article, but with different sources. So that's something that will result in your email going into my inbox. I think it's really critical for press people to do their research well ahead of pitching, because you're wasting my time, obviously, but you're also wasting your own time, and it's a breakdown in communication. It's a breakdown in the relationship that you could be building with a media person.
Awesome. Joanna Berrigan's asking, how do you recommend PR professionals cut through the noise, given that there's one main news topic right now?
That's a great question, and I think it's difficult, and I think that journalists are actually grappling with this issue as well, because as I said before, yes, we're looking at everything through the COVID-19 lens. I mean, if you look at most Forbes articles, even if the main main topic of contention isn't COVID-19 itself in this pandemic, there'll typically be a line in there that'll allude to the pandemic itself. So I think what always holds true for a journalist is that it has to be something newsworthy. So even if there isn't a COVID-19 lens and you're not filtering it through that lens, as I said before, if it's newsworthy, we'll cover it. And you have to remember, our readers don't want COVID-19 all the time. I'm exhausted and I'm working within this space. So I can only imagine what our audience feels like. If it's a compelling story, if you're doing something super unique, super compelling, we want to hear about it and we're more than willing to write about it. We recently received our numbers, Forbes did, from Omnicom, looking at the stories that really did well over the last month because we hit a number of new records. If I'm not mistaken, we're now the #1 business news site, and we have about 300 to 400 million visitors over the last 2 months. So we're breaking previous records for ourselves. But a number of the stories that did really well, the articles that did really well, had nothing to do with the pandemic. Obviously, there were some stories that touched on the pandemic. A number of them didn't. So if it's a compelling story, pitch it anyway.
Awesome. Tell us how you're developing relationships with PRs and expert sources right now. Are you open to background chats? What's working for you these days?
Yeah, so as I said before, the pandemic is, we started this shelter in place, in March, just 2 months ago. So we're still in the infancy within this pandemic. I'll first go to what I've been doing before the pandemic started. I'm always happy to have a chat with a press person. Our offices are in Jersey City, so any excuse to meet in New York City and then where I actually live, I'll take that offer. But always happy to also hop on a phone call. I know everything has moved digital or has moved to telephone these days, but I have to know that I'm getting something out of a conversation. I think a great way to get a journalist who is exceedingly busy to sit down with you is to pitch an idea. Say, hey, I want to talk this over with you. This is why I think it's relevant to you. And if it's not relevant to you, then let's hop on the phone so I can understand your coverage area and I can pitch you far more relevant pieces going forward. I think that's just a shoo-in right there.
And you'll respond to those kinds of pitches?
I typically will. Obviously a lot of it is a bandwidth issue. I can't respond to every single press person who reaches out to me, but more or less, if it's compelling enough, I usually give at least 10 minutes, at least 15 minutes to hear you out. So listen to whatever pitch it is that you're sending my way, but always, always, always pitch in an email, do not call.
Okay. Herman Brody's asking, tell us about firms that have done D&I well, not the startups who have it in their DNA, but established firms that weren't doing it well, but are now getting some traction.
Yes. Well, first of all, I will say that you'd be very surprised. Many startups, actually most startups, do not have in their DNA. And I think that that's problematic in and of itself because we're now looking at the next generation, the next wave of billion-dollar startups and unicorns, and they're mainly white, cisgender men. And so we're kind of fostering this lack of diversity as we look at the next generation of business. But in terms of companies that maybe weren't doing it as well before, but are now, I think a number of the financial institutions can be lauded. I think JP Morgan is doing a really great job. They've done a ton of campaigning. They've worked extensively to really up the number of analysts who are people of color. They've put millions and millions of dollars toward initiatives that leverage and really uplift Black and Brown entrepreneurs. I think Morgan Stanley is another great example. They've hired a number of high-level executives who are women, who are Black, who are Latinx, and who really represent the demographics that you'd see in the US. Across the board, they all have a ton more work to do. The progress has been incremental and slow, but then again, we are seeing progress.
Do you cover immigration-related stories under your remit?
Yeah, so immigration-related stories, I would say that is a part of D&I. I have writers under me who do cover that. I haven't covered it myself extensively. I think one of the main reasons, again, is that Forbes likes to cover entrepreneurial capitalism. And so there's usually some type of money amounts that we like to see. And so we've had to really work around that just to widen the talent pool, even for, Americans who are from underrepresented backgrounds, but we haven't covered it extensively. But if you have a great pitch, more than happy to hear it. I do also want to note that because we're talking about underrepresented communities and Black communities and so on, just because someone is a part of that community doesn't mean that it's a D&I story. And I'll give a great example. Robert F. Smith, he's a billionaire. He's the #1 richest Black person within the US. We did a profile on him here at Forbes. He was on our cover. That in itself wouldn't be a D&I story simply because he exists as a Black man. It's a business story because of his business savvy and his business acumen. And so I believe either our wealth team or a money team wrote a piece on him. Now, Robert Smith last year donated, he covered, if I'm not mistaken, the entire tuition for the graduating class of 2019 at Howard University, and that's an HBCU. That in itself is a D&I story because he is actively looking to boost and propel the next wave of Black graduates who have historically been disenfranchised and disadvantaged and been straddled by student debt. And so we looked at it through that lens. So that's just something that's really important to remember. Just because someone's a woman or from an underrepresented group doesn't make them a D&I story. We have a number of beats here at Forbes, pitch them as such, pitch them based on their business acumen.
Great advice. Steph Chan's asking, what was your favorite interview and why? Can you think of something recent?
There have been so many. I think I like interviews that really make me think or where I can push back. I did a piece recently, and this one's really coming to mind, where I spoke to a number of chief executives at a number of Fortune 500 companies, from LinkedIn to Facebook to Amazon to Google, and I was really asking them how, we're now in this, we're social distancing, we're seeing increased depression and anxiety and fear within the workplace. We're seeing people of color and women who are disproportionately affected in their personal lives, but also in the job market. What does your company do and how do you aim to address that? And so it really forced them to think. It really led to some really compelling conversations. Not all of it made its way into the article, but that article did so well, I think, because it was extremely relatable. And I think that's a question that a number of executives across the board, no matter how big your company is, are really grappling with right now. How do we support our employees, especially those who are from underrepresented backgrounds? I also did a piece recently where I spoke with John Legend and his work getting formerly incarcerated people back into the workplace because they have high unemployment rates. And so I love doing pieces where, someone has a huge platform and they're known for one thing, like music and entertainment, but they're using that platform and that know-how to then elevate those who are from marginalized backgrounds.
Awesome, great examples. Someone's asking a very specific question, Carolyn Hoffman. What do you think about PR distribution services? Do you open emails coming from them? Or are you more likely to open something from a person who contacts you directly?
I never open PR distribution service emails. I don't know anyone.
That was clear.
I don't know any reporter who does. I think always send me a direct email, make it personalized, make it customized to my area of coverage. If anything, I actually unsubscribe from them.
Okay, great. Are you interested in skills gap and women in STEM related topics? Yes, that is a topic I've covered extensively while at CNBC. I think it's even more relevant now. There obviously is a skills gap. We're seeing companies like IBM that are really pushing not only skills gap for women, but skills gaps across the board. And they're looking to hire people based on these skills that they do have and not necessarily where they went to college. So there's also that element of socioeconomic diversity that we also cover here at Forbes. But yes, I'm always looking for pitches like that. And we also have a Forbes women team, and I know that they look for pitches that align with that subject area as well. So how do you figure things out between the Forbes women's team and your teams?
So Maggie McGrath, she spearheads Forbes Women, and we're still figuring that out a year and a half in, but it's really just about open communication. I think that maybe I'll focus more on myself and then I'll go into how she tackles it. But I look more at systemic issues. I write more complex, longer form pieces that look at things from a holistic bird's eye view level. She really focuses more so on building a community, looking at what female founders are doing more so than simply looking at those systemic issues and looking at some of those barriers from that standpoint. I also focus more on women who are intersectional. So for instance, I'd focus more so on a transgender woman or a woman with a disability. I really try and push it from that angle and look at why it is that this is newsworthy. Why is it a big deal that Martine Rothblatt is a transgender woman? She's a self-made billionaire. That's something I cover, even though, yes, she is a woman, could technically go under Forbes Woman, but because it's intersectional, that allows her to align more and more in my purview, but it's really a toss-up based on our bandwidth.
That's good guidance. You're going to be exhausted because there are a lot of questions for you.
Keep it coming.
Are you interested in LGBTQ youth stories, or does it really have to have a business angle?
It has to have a business angle. And I mean, there are ways that you could get in there. There's money that's going towards LGBTQ youth services? Are there organizations that are putting money towards it? I mean, you can pretty much turn anything into business news if you really want to, but there has to be some sort of money figure behind it.
Okay. What about seniors? The specific question is, what about timeshare related fraud? Are the elderly within your purview?
We cover ageism. We cover ageism under D&I. We don't specifically cover seniors in and of themselves as its own demographic. That said, we do have a personal finance team and a retirement team that would cover a topic like that, but I don't think that type of topic would necessarily fall under D&I unless they're being preyed upon because of their age and the fact that they're older. But I don't know that they'd necessarily be a D&I tie-in.
Okay, got it. Are you interested in sources in Europe, or do you prioritize US sources?
I do prioritize US sources, and the reason I do is because Forbes is a global brand. We have Forbes Africa, which is kind of a separate entity in and of itself, but we also have a number of reporters and editors out in Europe. And so if you're pitching Europe sources, it only makes sense for you to pivot to our Europe editors. But on my end, I generally, focus on US sources. That's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Okay. What are the types of things that you think companies need to be doing around D&I, but they're not?
I think companies, oh my God, there's so much. I think companies need to do more around supporting employee resource groups first and foremost. I think a number of companies like to highlight how many ERGs they have, how many affinity groups they have. But when I ask them, okay, how do you support them? How are you backing them besides having them for optics? They generally don't have a very substantive answer. I also think we need more around accessibility, especially within the tech space. What is your company doing, especially as we're now social distancing and we're relying on digital technology? What's your company doing to make sure that those who are low vision or those who are hearing impaired or blind or deaf, what are you doing to allow them to have access to your jobs website or to apply for a competition for those with disabilities? What are you doing for them? How are you engaging them? I think that topic is becoming more popular. Topics about neurodiversity in particular, and hiring those with ADHD or autism, et cetera, but I think across the board, a lot more needs to be done. And that's what makes this beat so exciting, is that there is opportunity for that.
There's certainly been a lot of data shared that during COVID-19, companies seem to be taking their eye off supporting D&I.
Yes.
Would you say that's what you're seeing across the board?
Yes, I think that's what I'm seeing across the board. I think that, I don't know if I'd say it's been placed on the back burner, but I think that when you're struggling to survive as an organization, it's very hard for you to prioritize diversity and inclusion. And it's very easy for you to fall back into your old ways, which is having a small old boys club and tapping into that. You often will not have as much money to put towards D&I initiatives. I think a number of us have heard about how Google reportedly slashed its D&I programs. And so you are seeing big organizations, big firms are putting D&I, or at least pushing it to the wayside, at least for now. I think what will really be interesting when the dust settles is how many employees are from underrepresented how many employees who are fired, furloughed, laid off are from marginalized backgrounds. Because when we're in when we're doing well economically, we're in a bull market and things are going well, it's so easy to say, yes, we're prioritizing D&I. You have the money, you have the cash flow, you have the revenue, but are you still holding yourself accountable to those D&I initiatives that you were promoting when life was good, when we're now in an economic downturn and it's really crunch time? It'll also be really interesting to see how many entry-level employees have been pushed out while corporate executives are getting bonuses. And as we know, people of color and women find it very hard to ascend through those corporate ranks. So I'm assuming, obviously I'm speaking hypothetically here, but I'm assuming a number of those corporate executives who managed to stay on and are still receiving bonuses are cisgender white men. So I think when the dust settles, there will be a number of questions for these companies, and consumers and journalists will be holding their feet to the fire.
Yeah, I look forward to that, especially when we look at how disproportionately the suffering is amongst those underrepresented communities through this. What about innovative D&I programs that you really admire? Anything that stands out that you'd want to share with this group?
Anything that stands out? I know this isn't so new anymore, but I remember when I was at CNBC, Virgin Atlantic, which is spearheaded by Richard Branson, was doing a lot of notable work in hiring those who had been formerly incarcerated. And that company was really the first one to push and promote that. I know that Google has done a lot of work in partnering with those who are from disabled communities, partnering with HBCUs. I don't know that there's anything particularly new and compelling now. I do know that a number of organizations have now started to launch or in the midst of creating employee resource groups for those who are 50 and up, who are often pushed out of the workplace once you hit a certain age. I know for women, I think it's at age 35 where you start experiencing ageism, and that's further compounded for women of color. So you are seeing organizations who are becoming increasingly aware of these more nuanced aspects of diversity and inclusion, but nothing extremely newsworthy that's coming to mind. I quite frankly think all of it's quite newsworthy.
Well, we can hope, right?
Yes.
Carolyn Hoffman's asking, she gets contacted by people who say they can get the company into Forbes for a fee. Are you aware of this? Do you know anything about it?
We are aware of that, and our editorial team has really been working. If you're hearing about that, it's most either from someone who is a contributor or a former contributor. We've really been working to cut those people out of Forbes' network of contributors. If you receive that email, please, please, please send it to someone at Forbes and we will deal with the matter. There is absolutely no reason that you should be paying to get your company or your source or your clients into any article, regardless of if it's Forbes or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. So if you do get that email, don't hesitate to send it through the company.
All right, that's pretty clear. Marion Bradley asked, do you follow up on any of the stories that you run to see if they're truly inclusive?
I think one thing to note is that D&I, it's not a one-time target. It's not a one-time goal. It's something that's ongoing. And I think that that's something people realize as they're reading these pieces. Yes, we often do. I mean, companies come out with diversity reports every year. Google just came out with one that I covered. And I said, look, this is how they've done over the last 5 years. They said that they want to hit this target by 2020, whatever. This is how far along they've come. This is what they're doing well. This is where they're falling short. So yes, we often will do that. I think it was Google and another tech company were kind of the first companies to really start publishing D&I reports outside of what the EEOC was calling for. And I think we'll soon be approaching the 10th or 11th year anniversary of that. And so we're also now thinking, okay, what have you done over the last 10 to 15 years? Where are we seeing progress? How much money have you put into D&I and what have you gotten out of that? So yes, we often do follow up, but I don't think we ever look at it through the lens of, oh, are you still inclusive or are you, it's always, it comes and goes, it abates and flows. And, unless it's something that's really eye-catching and newsworthy and compelling, we typically won't go back unless it is a big company, but we're not looking at it through the lens of, are you truly inclusive? That comes through in the first article.
Got it. Steph Shan's asking, what types of data sources do you prefer to use? Would you take survey data done by consulting companies?
Yes, depending on how big, we will look at data from the McKinseys, the Accentures, the Deloittes. We obviously will, it depends also on methodology, it depends on how timely it is, and it also depends on when you're looking to publish it. So someone asked me about pet peeves earlier. One of my pet peeves is getting a study or a survey a day before it's supposed to go live, because yes, I want that survey and I do want to cover it, but I also need experts to weigh in, and I'm not just going to reiterate essentially as a mouthpiece for a company the study that you put out there. I need experts and fellow consultants and researchers and academics and executives to weigh in and provide some insight so that our readers are really getting the full scope of this story. Otherwise, I'm most likely not going to cover it.
So how much lead time do you want? Do you need a week? Do you need a few days?
Always, I mean, the longer the better. A week would be fantastic. Sometimes they don't always give us that, but I'd say 24 hours, not really doable unless there's, you know, some insight that just has never been touched on before.
Got it. You mentioned that you prefer emails over calls, and you definitely do not want calls. What about tweets?
No, I do not like tweets. I'd actually prefer calls, I think, over tweets. I prefer tweets. There's a hierarchy. So I say email is always the best bet for any journalist. We check our email. If we don't respond, it's because we don't have the bandwidth to respond or because it's not something that we want to pursue at that time. I know that I have this and a number of my colleagues have this. If I don't want to cover something right away, I have a folder and I say story ideas. And so I'll put it into that folder. And if I really want to cover it, I will get to it. But yeah, definitely no calls. I wouldn't do Twitter. The only time I follow up on Twitter stories is if it's a whistleblower or if it's more of an investigative piece, because I've noticed that a number of sources just feel more comfortable sliding into Twitter DMs than they do using their direct email to reach out to a journalist.
Great. How do you like for PRs to follow up on email story ideas they've sent to you?
Yes, email is always the best way to follow up because, as I said, I always check my email. Every day my inbox is at 0. I'm always looking at my email, and I'd say give it 3 days to a week. Unless it's super timely, then okay, pitch it to me again, but no more than 2 times. We've definitely seen it.
Okay, great. Good advice. There are certain PR people who you really trust and you're going to immediately look at their emails in a crowded inbox, and how did you develop that trusting relationship with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll split into 2 categories. There are press people who work with corporations, and then there are press who are actually part of the corporation's communications team, right? And then there are outside press people who work for agencies, and they work in tangent with corporations. So I'll focus on those who are in-house. They'll usually go to the top of the line because more often than not, they're giving me an exclusive. They're able to get the sources I need on the phone faster because they're already in that company. I mean, it's quite easy for them to get someone on the phone with quick turnaround. So those will typically go to the front of the line. We have a camaraderie. We understand that there's a mutually beneficial element to this, PR journalist relationship. Now, looking at those who are outside agencies, I think it's about knowing exactly what it is that the journalist covers and what gets their juices flowing, so to speak. A number of them I wouldn't call it a friendship because I was trying to keep that barrier between the 2 of us, but they can hop on the phone and say, hey, off the record or on background, we're thinking of doing this, or our company's going to do this. Here's a 1-week notice. We've pitched it to these other publications. Are you interested? And we can talk off the record and it won't go outside of the conversation. So we've established kind of those boundaries. But it's really about pitching me topics that I can actually cover and that will be compelling to my audience and that will do well traffic-wise.
Awesome. That totally makes sense. So can you go through the elements of a good pitch?
Yes. So I'll do this for Forbes in particular. Timeliness, why is it topical? I always say, and excuse my profanity here, but what's the who gives a fuck factor? Who's the audience? Why should they care? Why is this important and newsworthy now? And that should be right in the first line, honestly. I'd also highlight any big names. I think it's often hard for small businesses or even medium-sized businesses to get into legacy media outlets like the Forbes, like the Wall Street Journals, like the CNBCs, because they're not a big name like Google or like Amazon or like Reddit. So talk to me about who your backers are. Is Andreessen Horowitz a backer? Is Arlen Hamilton a backer? Really hype up what makes you really notable and commendable. Also the timeliness factor, why now? So I'll give an example. Morgan Stanley has an accelerator program. They're now that caters to Black and Brown entrepreneurs. They're now it's now in its third year. They just started their next cohort of entrepreneurs, and so it's no longer something that's new. So we want things that are new, that are unique and exclusive. But why I decided to cover it this year is because they pitched it to me through the lens of COVID-19. They said, yes, we're in our third year, but this is the first year that we're doing the entire program from a virtual format. And so if you know anything about the D&I space and about how hard it is for Black and Brown entrepreneurs to get funding, you know that there are a myriad of reasons why it's hard for them to get funding, but one of those reasons is because they simply don't have access to those social networks. And I said, well, they don't have access to those in-person social networks. How are you going to make this work from a virtual format? This doesn't make sense to me. And so I said, well, if I'm asking that question as a journalist, I'm sure my readers would want to know. And so that article ended up doing very well. And Carla Harris, who's an executive there, jumped on the phone and was willing to walk me through this program. And then I noticed the trend that this is something that a number of other companies are going to have to start doing. And it kind of turned into a trend piece. Goldman Sachs is doing something similar. JP Morgan is doing something similar. So if you can often bring back or revive, as I call it, an old story if you pitch it through a fresh lens.
Great, that's helpful. So you mentioned that you are interested in pitches that are LGBTQ related, that have a business angle.
Business, yes.
What else are you working on right now?
That's really the main, well, because we're looking at June and we're looking to do a massive package that takes a lot, it's a heavy lift and it takes a lot of work. That's really primarily what I'm working on now. But I mean, as I said before, I'm always open to pitches. I think something that it's a bit of concerning, but I'll stick to D&I in particular. I've noticed that for Women's History Month or for Black History Month or for Pride Month, you'll often see this deluge of pitches for people who fit within that demographic and within that diaspora. And I said, okay, I understand that it's TK month, but you can pitch me them year round. They're still just as interesting year round. They're just as compelling year round. And once again, just because they do identify as a member of the LGBTQ community does not necessarily mean that it's a D&I story. Again, we want to promote them and highlight them because they are an entrepreneur or they're an innovative executive or whatever the case may be. There's more substance to simply to your identity. So that's something I have to continually drill and reiterate to PR people.
Awesome, that's helpful. All right, audience, please send us your questions. And I think I gotten to folks, but please type it. If I missed you, please don't hesitate to type that in. We want to make sure we get to everyone. I went too fast on all those questions.
While we are waiting for questions, I also want to add, I often see PR people pitch me people and organizations, which I think it's perfectly fine. But I think what PR people really need to focus on is pitching issues and pitching topics, because I'm assuming, especially if you're working for an agency that's not in-house or part of a corporate structure, you most likely have a number of clients who are doing similar things or a number of sources who can speak to a particular topic. So often, especially within D&I, the topic itself is what's more compelling. Maybe there's a trend that you notice and you say, hey, this is an interesting trend. It'll make for a great piece because of this, this, and this. Here are 3 people I can get on the phone to discuss that. And I think that's a far more strategic way of pitching to a journalist than simply saying, hey, I have this one person who's mid-level, mid-manager who can talk about this one specific issue. Are you willing to hop on the phone and craft an entire article around their viewpoints? That's just not going to happen.
Oh, good advice. All right, lots of questions coming in. Any elements in a pitch that make you cringe, other than the one you just spoke about?
I think I've covered most of them. Wrong names, that happens a lot. My email also, this happened today. My email is rumoh@forbes.com. And so I'll often have people refer to me as Rumo instead of realizing that it's the first letter of my first name along with my last name. So they'll refer to me by my email. But in terms of things that are cringeworthy, I mean, anything that shows that you haven't done your research will get you, put into the junk box, as I said before.
Great. This is a good question from Melissa. Are there any things that are a big red flag regarding D&I when you're looking into a company, maybe a pitch they sent? I mean, are you looking at executive diversity, board diversity, really seeing if they walk the walk?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because again, Forbes has a brand and we don't want any blowback. So I'll give an example. In January, we published I believe it's the third annual Best Employers for Diversity list. We went, and I say we, my assistant editors and myself, we went through the list of, I believe it was 500, and we went through every company and we looked at their diversity reports, if they were a public company and they offered that. We looked at the diversity at the C-suite, so that's CROs, CHROs. Do their chief diversity officers actually report to the CEO, or do they report to the chief human resource officer, which we don't necessarily want? What does the board diversity look like? And we Googled their names, we looked at pictures, and so yes, we definitely put in the work to really make sure that they are walking the walk. Obviously, companies will say that they are, and they're quite evidently not. But yes, we definitely do the groundwork and we do extensive research to look into diversity and inclusion across the board from the top down.
Awesome. That's a lot of work.
Yes, it is a lot of work.
I think you've spoken about mental health does fall under your beat. Can you give an example of what would be a compelling mental health related pitch?
Yes, so one I did recently, it was, and my memory serves me well, it was more of a trend piece about the fact that employees across the board, well, even if you're not an employee, even more so if you're not an employee and you don't have a job, you are feeling uncertainty, you're feeling increased feelings of depression. And within the workplace, there's so much, we're physically distanced. And so there's not that camaraderie and that, that ability to really connect in the same way as you can do in person. And so for essential workers, that's further compounded. And so I did a piece about how I think it's called teletherapy has really increased. The use of teletherapy has increased within the last month or so. A number of mental health and mental wellness apps are offering free services to essential workers, to those on the medical front lines. I believe an app more recently came out with a press release stating that they're now going to be offering free premium services to those who have lost jobs in the US. So those types of pieces, they're social good pieces, but there's still a business angle. It's a company that's promoting a product for free. So yes, there isn't a high valuation or a high monetary stake behind it, but often that word free will catch a reader's attention because it is a service that's being offered. And it's timely because we're looking at essential workers who are putting their lives on the line, and there's that business angle. They're within the workplace and they're suffering from increased feelings of depression and anxiety and other feelings of mental unwellness. So that's I think kind of like the standard go-to story. I'm also looking to do more pieces just around how working mothers in particular are handling the stress of working from home, bearing the brunt of taking care of their elderly parents along with their children, along with their husband, and making sure that the whole household is running while they're also looking to deal with systemic barriers in the workplace and promote their career and be more visible through a digital space where it's easy to have someone speak over you. So there's so many elements to D&I that you can look at through the lens of business. And when I say business, I'm talking corporate structures, I'm talking companies that have I'm talking entrepreneurs that have founded companies that address these issues, and I'm talking free services within the workplace, what companies are doing to address these issues. So you can come at it from a lot of different angles.
Awesome, great detail. Cheryl's asking if your client is just a minor celebrity name, not a household name, but has some name recognition, Does that move the needle for you? Should that be high up in the pitch?
It depends. I think it really depends. I had a pitch recently. I mean, I say it doesn't hurt to pitch it, right? I had a pitch recently about a Real Housewife members. And so for my fellow Bravo fans, Real Housewives obviously is the show that looks at Real Housewives. Oftentimes they're no longer housewives on the Bravo channel. And so I recognized the name, but I knew that the standard Forbes reader wouldn't recognize the name. And so knowing my audience, I said, this isn't for us. Maybe you can pitch it to a Cosmo or you can pitch it to E! News. I think it would really be more relevant for that audience. So I think it's also about knowing the audience that you're pitching to. Would they recognize the name? For that, in that instance, obviously they would not.
Good guidance. Here's a really good one. Anthony Lamb wants to know, have you blacklisted or blocked PR people?
Yes, I have.
Is it a long list or a short list?
I would say it's a fairly short list. It takes a lot for me to, so Forbes has this system that's called Mimecast. And so you can block emails from a particular press person or from a particular email. So if you're repeated, I'm inundated with emails all the time, so you have to be really egregious in order to get blocked. But if you're pitching me things that have nothing to do with my coverage area, you're wasting both of our time, as I said before, and so I just don't want that in my inbox. But you have to be really egregious and go out of your way to get blocked, and not just blocking someone because they sent me one pitch that did not fall under my purview.
All right, that's good to know. Tori Simmons asks, are you open to introductory calls? For example, they have a financial advisor who focuses on the racial wealth gap, the topic you do cover. Would you be interested in an introductory call for sources to use down the road?
Absolutely, always open to introductory calls. Always looking for more sources, especially as it pertains to the wealth gap, because that is such a niche topic area. So yes, pitch me after this webinar.
Awesome. So in addition to the wealth gap, any other topics where you would be open to introductory calls with the right spokespeople?
Yeah, so it's very, very difficult for me to find experts on disability employment. I often have to get someone on the phone from the Bureau, from BLS in particular, and they're not always the best source. I'm always looking for chief executives or consultants or researchers or those in academia who can share their expertise within that space. So anything that looks at the intersection of the job market and an underrepresented group, and how the two work in tangent.
Awesome. How do independent sources and subject experts not represented by agencies make their voices heard?
I don't think it's that hard. I'll give you an example. So there's a company that actually made our 30 under 30 list, and it's a VC company, and it's called Harlem Capital. They're quite popular at this point. They're based in New York, and it's a team of a diverse group of men and women who invest in companies founded by underrepresented founders. And so they got on Forbes' radar by simply pitching themselves, reaching out to one person and pitching just as a press person would pitch themselves, just telling us why you're newsworthy, why you're different, why you're unique, why you're compelling, what's the business case for us to report on you. The same things that you'd ask of a PR person, an independent person should have as well. It's quite easy to get on a journalist's radar if the topic you're pitching is newsworthy. That's really all we're concerned about.
Great. Are you open to taking email Q&As in lieu of phone interviews when there's a language or accent barrier?
I want more specifics for this question. I'm trying to think, and I don't want to give a false answer. I don't think that I've ever had an instance where I had to do email Q&As. The only time I've had to travel for stories were to Nigeria or to Europe, which are English-speaking nations. Other times it was Spanish, and I studied Spanish in college, and we have Spanish speakers at Forbes who I could turn to. I want to say yes, I'm against emailed Q&As. I almost never will do an email interview, just because I want to be able to dig into whatever sentiment is expressed, and I want to ensure that it's coming from the source and not the source's press person. So I almost never do Q&As. I think in that circumstance, I probably we'd probably get an outside interpreter. I think that's most likely what would happen. We'd get an outside interpreter that we'd hire on Forbes end.
Okay, good advice. Here's a question. I'm just a small business owner, and although I've been quoted in an article in Forbes before and other platforms, I've not directly pitched to you before. Do you need to be hugely successful with staff and large turnover to pitch you? I've got a debilitating health condition and was told to quit work, but have run an award-winning business for 6 years.
Mm-hmm. No, you don't have to be a big company. You definitely don't. And I'll give an example. There's a piece I'm working on right now where I am doing a profile of sorts on blind workers or blind or low vision workers who are on the front lines of COVID-19. This is a demographic that has exceptionally high unemployment rate. It's super timely because we're in the midst of the pandemic, and it's a story that really hasn't been told before. So you definitely don't have to be, some well-known established entrepreneur that's a household name, and someone so eloquently put it earlier. Again, it's all about being newsworthy. If you feel that you don't have the gravitas to just pitch your own story, which often happens even for those who are who work for larger, more well-known organizations, then as I said before, pitch a topic, say this is compelling and this is interesting, and then the reporter can then say, okay, I have one person. If I think there's a trend here, let me find additional sources, and then we can compile a story around this overall topic, not necessarily just focusing on one person in one business. Great,
good advice, thank you. One more question. How do you work with contributors at Forbes?
I need more specifics in terms of...
Oh, that's a terrible last question.
How we find them, how we pitch them. Well, so I'll give some background. In terms of how we find them, and it's different for everyone, but for D&I, I'm very proactive about the contributors I want. I know the holes and the niche areas that I want filled, and so I'm very proactive about saying, hey, I read your work in the Wall Street Journal, I read the piece you wrote for Harvard Business Review, would you be interested in covering this specific area for Forbes? And I do I do a quick background check, I look into their LinkedIn, into their Twitter, and I send them our Forbes contributor submission form. Let's say that they've gone through our vetting and they're now a Forbes contributor. There's a lot of flexibility and independence to write the stories that they find most intriguing and the most interesting, but I often do pitch stories to my contributors. It doesn't happen often. I wouldn't advise a PR person to pitch me in the hopes that I'll then pass it on to my contributor. I'd say go directly to the contributor. They're very happy to boast about the fact that they're contributors on their LinkedIn or on their Twitter. And so you can contact them through their personal email or through those social media platforms. But sometimes I'll pitch my contributors, but more so if it's a trending news story.
Great, awesome. Ruth, thank you so much. That was so informative, and I think your email is going to be flooded after this.
I think so, but
hopefully with the right thing.
Matt, I think you are on mute.
Good call. I just want to thank you both. I mean, it was very insightful. I appreciate both of you taking the time out to address all these questions. Thanks to all the participants for keeping the questions flowing throughout the conversation. And we will be circulating a recording of the webinar for anybody who wants to share it with colleagues or finds it helpful to share it with industry peers. We'll share the recording after this. So thanks again, both of you, for taking the time out. Yeah. It was super, engaging and insightful. So we appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ruth. That was terrific.
Thank you,
Matt.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye. Yeah, thanks, guys.